All right, so thanks everybody for sticking it out so far. We realize these are long days. We hope this has been helpful up to this point. Have a couple more things to discuss that we think will be useful to know for the workshop next week. The topics in this session should go by a little bit quicker, and then we have a session in Module 4 on some object-oriented programming concepts. It's a little bit more conceptual. But just as a reminder for anybody who's just now joining us, this slide deck is available in the student materials folder in the day 0 slides folder. Please do submit any questions, concerns you have in the chat along the way. It doesn't just have to be about stuff that we've currently covered. If you still have lingering questions from earlier in the day, please feel free to bring those up as well, and we can try to circle back on those by the end of the day. If you haven't joined the Slack channel yet, please do so soon. We will be using that for sort of asynchronous communication during the workshop about stuff kind of outside the bounds of the normal session content. And just as a reminder, this session, along with all the sessions during the workshop, will be live streamed, recorded, and distributed to YouTube for future viewing. So this session is being live streamed and recorded now, just so everybody is aware. All right, see a couple of people logging back in. Coming back from lunch. So for this session, there are 2 main topics that we would like to address. We're going to talk for the first little bit about defining custom functions in Python and how functions in general work. We've already used a couple of them. We talked about the append function and the extend function and a couple other things related to lists in the last module, but we'll look in more detail in this session about how functions work and how to write your own. And then we will talk in the second half about dictionaries, and we have a couple of activities to do for each thing. So first things first, we'll go through our details on functions in Python. So kind of as we were alluding to earlier with the append function and the list data types, a function is basically a chunk of code that is intended to be reusable. So it's something that you can call or invoke within the body of either the program you're currently writing or even another program that has maybe imported the package to do certain things to different objects in your program that maybe you don't want to have to rewrite in your program body every time you write a program. Function has several characteristics. It has a name that's specified by the person who writes it. It takes in some number of parameters. 0 parameters is also an option. You can have a function that just does something but doesn't take in any information. Most functions will have what's called a doc string. So this is when you're writing a function, you put in some comments that kind of explain what the function is and what it does so that people looking at your function library later can figure out what each thing is supposed to do. It has a body, so this is the actual code that the function is running when you call it, and then it always returns something. So the function will run. If it takes in parameters, you will specify what those parameters are. It will perform some operation in the body of the function, and then it will return a data type at the end of the function that you can either store as a variable, you can use it to do checks in control flow loops, things like that. So we'll get more into how that works in the next couple of slides. So this is an overview of what an example function might look like when we're writing them on our own. So in this case, this function checks to see if a number is even. So we did this earlier today by using the modulus operator. Again, checking to see if the remainder is 0 or non-zero to determine if something is even. So we define the function as is even. It takes in a parameter of I, so it's taking in an integer value. Here you'll see we have our doc string. in quotes here. So this is essentially a comment telling us what the function does. And then it has a return value. So just to kind of mark this up a little bit, we've got keyword for defining a function is def for define or definition. Name of the function is even, parameters, body. And then here at the bottom, we have what's called the function call. So if you were to use this and later in the program or in another program, you would call is even, and then in parentheses, the number 3 that you want to check, and it will either print if it is or not, and then return the value. So inside the function body, again, run some commands, got a keyword to return and the expression to evaluate and return. For talking about variable scope, so this is important when you start thinking about how to define parameters for your functions. There's this idea of a formal parameter and an actual parameter. So when you're defining your function, a formal parameter is kind of a placeholder for the parameter that you're actually passing in when the function is called. So here in our definition of f, function f, it takes in a formal parameter of x, which is the value that is being used as an example in the body of the function. And then when the function is called, you replace this with an actual parameter. So in this case, x would be 3. When you call the function, it replaces or binds that value to the formal parameter while the function is being run. So in terms of scope, what this means is that once this is passed in, only the function that's currently being run can see that value. In order to use the result, like I was saying somewhere else, you'll have to store it in a variable that can then be referenced later. So the function itself does not see anything else that's going on, see anything else that's going on in the program until you call it and give it a specific input. This works kind of the same way that we talked a little bit about in the loops before, where the function has to be, or the variable has to be defined before you try to increment it, because the for loop, the for loop needs the establishment of the parameter outside of the for loop. This is kind of similar in terms of that scope, is you have to pass in the value so that the function can see what to do with it. So here, just some more on scope. We have some code, passes in 3, and we end up with 4 being stored in Z. That's what's returned after the operation on X. One warning about writing functions in Python is that if there is no return statement, Python returns the default value of none if you haven't provided a return statement. Every function in Python needs to have a return statement, something to send back at the end of the function. So this function will run, but it effectively doesn't really do anything because there's no return. So that was a very quick overview on writing functions. And we have an exercise here that should take somewhere between 10 to 20 minutes. And the idea here is to write an ID lookup function. So you want to write a function that takes in 2 parameters, first being a list of names, and the second being an integer value representing the ID number of the name at that index. You can assume that ID numbers are assigned to each name in the list sequentially and should start at 1. And then once you've fed those in, it will print the name corresponding to the provided ID number with some flavor text. So the person with the ID number N is another name. And then it should also print an error message if the provided ID number is out of bounds of the list. So if the number does not exist in the list, it should print an error. So we'll say, let's take 10 minutes maybe to work on that, and then we can walk through it together. And if you need, again, if you need the syntax here, you can find it in the slides, but I can also share my screen again here. Sorry, looking for the reader view. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and start up a new notebook like we did before. Got some different answers going in the chat. I'm gonna put a couple of these in our document. We can take a look. Abhishek, it looks like you're on the right track, but you want to feed in just one ID number and give us back the name of the person at that location in the list.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, that way we can hypothetically we could use this if we just have somebody's ID number to retrieve their name. Oh, so Ravi, I was looking at your code confused about how it possibly produced the name John, but then I realized it's because you used the same name for your list as Avishek's example did.
Yes, I was
I was-
wondering.
I
Yes.
thought you had sent me some kind of wizardry.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll call yours. Let's see. There we go. All right, so this is pretty good. How is everybody else doing? Let me relaunch our completion poll here. Got a couple notes of feedback for people who have submitted. Relaunch the completion poll. So let us know how you're doing. If you still need more time, that's okay. You got plenty for this activity. Looks like people are finishing up. A couple people need help, need more time. If you need help, please let us know in the chat what you're struggling with, or if you would like to unmute and share screen, you can. We have a little bit of extra time in this session for answering questions. In the meantime, Sarabi, I like your solution. It's very elegant. The one thing I
Thank you
would
very
say
much.
is that um, so you've got your situation covered if the index is less than one, but there's also the
Yes.
possibility that they put in a value higher than the number of people in
Ah,
the list, right?
right. Okay, then we can add something like or means or condition.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let you add and then
Mhm.
we can update here if you want. And then Jupiter, yours is working. So I added some name examples and called the function. And it looks like it's working right. It's accounting for the list starting at one instead of zero, but we do get this double output. So we've got a print statement, and then it also outputs the name again. So if you wanted to take a second look at that, maybe see if we can get rid of that second output, how would you do that? It's the return, right? So what would we have to do here to fix that double print? Yeah, so we can just make this none here the same way you have it, because technically the purpose of this is just to display. Um, so now if we run this, yes, we'll just get our print statement. You could have, if you wanted this function to save the name of the person for future use. So if you were using this function to look somebody up by ID and then like pass their information into a form or something like that, then you would need to return the person here. And you could store that in a string variable. Um, and because we're running in Jupyter and it's an interactive Python prompt, it just displays the latest thing that was resolved, which in this case would be your return. If you were running this in like a normal Python interpreter with just text files, you wouldn't actually see that because it would be returned into nothing. But here, because we're in an interactive shell, it shows us the last result, which is why we're getting that double print. All right, got a couple more. So this is from I'm just going to put a couple more of these in and then we'll look through the different approaches. This one's from um, Coffee. I see. So Robbie, you got your update here. I will add that in. Yep, copy the or. Yeah, so Jupiter, just one more note. So if you're in normal Python coding, it's okay to have like a return that doesn't necessarily go anywhere. Python just needs something to return, but if it's never intending to be used or stored anywhere, it's just good practice to return none for efficiency's sake. Um, just so that you don't have a bunch of extra information being fed into nowhere. All right, so Kimberly, we have a syntax error, line 7. So first thing here, Kimberly, is you're missing a parentheses. Let's just run that again. Now in line 8, here we have a missing concatenation. All right, so that ran without errors, didn't print anything though. Let's see, this function assigns an age and returns the appropriate person's name. Okay, that'll work. We got 6 and 6. So here, Kimberly, what's missing is your function call. So you've written the function and you've got your name list and your age, but now you need to actually call the function.
You mean the return? Is that what you mean?
Um, Not quite. So if we look at, let me go back to the slides here for just a second. So here, we were looking at this slide before. So we have our function name, our doc string, our function body, and then we have our function call where we actually invoke the function. So right now we've just defined this function. So it's just sitting there waiting to be used, but it doesn't do anything until we tell it to run. So what we would need to do in this case, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we need to do, so you've got your name list and your ages. Now what we need to do is ID lookup, and then we feed in the name list and the age list. So it tried to run, and now we have an issue where name n is not defined. So if you want to take a minute to look at that, see if you can figure out what's going on with the n. But this is the
Maybe
piece
a
you need to
different error.
actually.
That's weird. I
Sorry?
got a different error. It's weird that I got a different error. It was a concatenation error again.
Okay, did you put this plus here?
Yes.
Hmm. Okay, well, I'll give you just a minute to look at that.
Oh, okay.
We can come back around in a minute. All right, so Vikram, it looks like yours is working. We do have this straggling none that's being printed though for some reason. First of all, you have a rogue F here in your print. Take those out first. So also, Vikram, with your print statement, you will need to concatenate in if you're trying to post or trying to include a value from a list index,
Okay.
you'll need to concatenate those out because this piece, the curly brackets I and curly brackets names, is just being parsed as more string text.
Okay, so that's the reason I'm saying. So if I put F in there, like I'm able to kind of get a proper printout.
Oh, you're right.
But
Sorry.
yeah, but thing is I'm getting none. I really don't know what is.
Yeah, that I'm not 100% sure where that's coming from yet. Take a closer
Yeah.
look. Yeah, so I'm wondering if it has something to do with the fact that you return before the second print statement.
Python won't interpolate variables inside of a string.
Yeah. But if I have like the test IDs like as a list, and if I put a for loop to test different list IDs, then I don't get that none. Only if I try to kind of look up the individual names, then I'm getting that none.
Mhm. Mhm. Sorry, Jim, what was your comment?
Those print statements are not going to interpolate the variables. So that I is going to be printed as an I. And the
Well, it's
line
not
above
the,
it, 2 lines above it, the names, line 5, the I is going to print as I, not the value. And names, etc., is going to just print the string names square bracket N.
that's what I thought too, but apparently this F trick prevents it from happening because here's the output.
Well, if you're going to use F, I think you need to give names for those things.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the F
Yes, I
workaround.
think that is what like we have defined the name list, and through that I'm able to kind of get.
What if
Mhm.
we delete the return?
Yeah, that's what I
And
was wondering.
say if I use the test ID numbers like 3, 4, 5, 6, like then try to look up, then I'm able to get up.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's not the return because we still get the none. And if we take the return out, Avishek, to answer your question, it will also print the error message every time because the return was what was, like, once we successfully found it, is what was breaking us out of the function.
I see.
So what if we just did this? Still gives us a none. Yeah, I'm not sure where that none value is coming from. Anybody else have some thoughts on this one?
Sorry,
What
I
if we
missed.
plug in an else before the print?
Hmm?
Uh, what if we plug in an else there?
What are you trying to return, Hayden?
Well, you can either, with this one, the idea is just to look up a name by their ID number and report it. Doesn't
So you have to
necessarily have
return,
to.
you have to return the result. So you're not returning anything. If you just do return, you're not returning anything.
Right. Well, the problem is just to print the person's name. It doesn't necessarily have to return doesn't have to return a string. It can, but
Okay, so if you do, but then that case that it does return none as a value.
mhm.
So if you remove on line 13 where it says print, that's where the none is coming from.
Oh, okay.
Because you're printing the
That's-
returned value,
yeah.
which doesn't exist.
That's
You'd have to
very
return the
obvious now.
index or the value.
Yeah. So let me undo this because your solution, Vikram, was quite clever with returning early instead of, building an if-else tree. So I don't want to mess that up. There we go. That fixes it.
Yeah. Okay.
So the ID lookup, when you call it, will print this to the console. So this is actually a good example of manipulating the return function. So let's see if we make this, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we make this 7, does it work? Yep. That's good too. You give the length of the list.
Give it 2.2.
2.2. Yeah. So yeah, here's kind of a good example of when you start building more complicated programs, you have to, especially anything that would take in user input, you have to start thinking about all of the different ways that someone can give you the wrong information. So some of the if-else trees can get pretty complicated. And you start getting into error handling at some point. We won't be talking about that today. It's a little outside the bounds of this training course, but yeah, so for this case, you would probably want to have, if somebody was going to give you a float, you would want to have an else if that checks to see if it's an integer or not. And if it's not an integer, then you would say something else, like stop messing around, pick a correct number, something like that. But this looks good.
Hayden, I have updated my code. I put it into as a response to my chat, and I'm getting a
Okay.
I'm getting a readout now, but it's now just giving the index ID. It's not associating with the value that's been assigned to the age. I'm missing
Mhm.
something.
All right, so we've got it. And you just gave starting with the for loop here.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a
Yeah. So yeah.
fleet of babies working at our company. All right. Sheila's getting a really early start. Well, let's see. So yeah, that's good. It's not throwing an error. Yeah, so what's happening here is, so there's two ways you can index these lists. When you use the range length of name list, it just takes the length of name list and makes your values that it's iterating over 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you wanted to actually access the names, let's see. So here you're trying to print the name with the corresponding age is what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't even know if the range operator or function is correct to use here.
Yeah.
Because it has to be an integer value inside, right? Range 10, range 6 or something.
Yes. So when you're doing range, what that says is it's going to iterate over from 0 to whatever your range value you've provided is, which in this case is 6. Because you've given it 0 to 5, including 0. Because there's 6 names. But
yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, let me check the chat. See
Like
if
I should
anybody
use like NumPy or something. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, so we have a suggestion here from show. let's see, if we replace with this, what do we get? Let's give it a run. Let's just continue to look at what you had currently. Name list, age. Yes.
Need to define I somewhere.
Yeah, so this is also, so what's happening here is you're casting age as a string, which is not actually their age. That's the value, the current value of the counter that you set up in
Okay.
the for loop.
Yes. Okay.
So in this case, you would need age. Now, this is usually a bad idea. So you would probably want to make this I, because you can't use the same value as an index within the same variable name. So now we get what you were looking for. Yeah, so when you set up the for loop, what it's doing is saying, so in this case, it's range from 0 to 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's creating I, a temporary variable I that starts at 0. So it'll run through the first one, print, and then increment I to 1,
Yes.
run through print. So does that make more sense? Yeah, the
A
problem
little
here
bit.
was that
Mhm.
you were printing, because age was the name of the counter, it was actually
Yeah.
printing the value of the temporary counter, not the actual index of the age list. So you're just missing this index here.
Nice. I'm glad I have the code, and thanks those that helped fix this. I'm not quite sure how I is pulling in the values I assigned from age. And it isn't just a counter. Like I see now that I just is a value within a range list,
Mhm.
but the range that I've shown there is name list, not the age list.
Right. So yeah, and this is, this is sort of a complicated idea. This is actually one of the harder things to get your head around when you're working and starting to learn programming, is how to keep track of these loops. And so what you're
Mhm.
doing is the range takes in an integer. So it would normally be range int, like an integer value, 3, 4. But we need to know how long your name list is, because your name list can be varying lengths. So the length function just counts how many things are in name list. So we have nested functions here. We're writing our own functions, but we're using other functions. And what length does is it returns an integer, which is then used by range to set that list up, or to set up the number of times it's going to iterate. And the reason why now we can access both your name list and your age list is because we're just using I as a numerical value to grab values out of name list and age from the same slot.
I mean, it looks kind of elegant.
Does
I'm
it
going
make
to
a little
review
more
this.
sense, maybe?
Kind of, but let's go on to another example. I'll keep studying this. It does
Okay.
seem elegant. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, so let's see. Yeah. And this works here because age and name list have the same length. That's a good point. If they were different lengths, you'd start running into issues. Because you're specifying your for loop based on just one of them, and it may not be the longest or shortest. So you may run into an out of bounds error if one of them is longer or shorter and it's trying to access a spot that doesn't exist. All right, so good. I think that's pretty good. Did I miss anybody in the chat? I think Katrin, it looks like you got some help from Jim and Lorenzo. Okay. So great. I think that is good. So likely to keep talking about a number of pretty different solutions to the same problem, just to kind of illustrate how something seemingly simple can be approached in a number of different ways. So I think that we can go ahead and move on. So that's the basics of defining functions. Again, like I said at the beginning of the day, we're going to cover a lot of these things kind of very quickly and not in a whole lot of depth. There's obviously only so much we can teach you about Python in a single day. But these are the things that you will need to be familiar with when we start working with CompuCell 3D's Python code. One new message. It's all good. Great. All right, so I think we can go ahead and move on to the next activity then. We've got about half an hour left. I think that's plenty of time for this. So one more thing to mention about functions. Each Python file, so this is a little bit abstracted by the Jupyter Notebook, but each Python file is a module. And you can define variables, functions, and other types in a module, which you can then import into other modules. So if you've ever used NumPy and you have to import NumPy at the beginning of your file before you can use NumPy, basically what NumPy is just a big library of a bunch of these different predefined functions that aren't native to the built-in Python function library itself. So you just say, I'm also going to look at this file, and then you can use the functions from that file and the variables from that file. So just something to keep in mind if you start doing Python work outside of the Jupyter setting. Each file is its own module, and you can import one file into another. When you're working locally, as long as they're in the same directory, they can read each other just fine. Yeah, Miguel makes a good point about variable names. If your function receives a list, you named it as age inside the function, then it would be better that a given list has another name. So it will work if you give it the same name as your formal variable. So we had talked about the formal variable and actual variables here. Technically that will work, but sometimes it gets a little bit complicated, and it increases the likelihood that there's going to be some kind of internal confusion in the function. So you generally want to give your actual parameters, the things you're feeding in, some name other than what has been defined in the function, just to make it easier on yourself more than anything else. Okay, so next topic we're going to talk about today is dictionaries. And again, we're not going to go into this super in depth, but it is important to kind of understand how dictionaries work. So this is another kind of like lists that we've talked about so far. A dictionary is a way of managing information in Python in a non-sequential manner. So up till now, we've talked about sequential object management. A dictionary is a way to keep track of objects in your program by using keys instead of sequential numbering. Take a quick drink of
Hello.
Hello. Oh, I guess that wasn't directed at us. All right, so a Python dictionary, and like I was saying, stores pairs of data, a key and a value, um, which allows us to search by keys and organize by keys within the dictionary list. So in this case, in blue, we have our keys, which are names, Anna, Denise, John, and Katie. And then their values, in this case, it looks like grades, B, A plus, and A. And you set this up pretty similarly to the way that you set up a list. Let me do a markdown code here. We'll just go ahead and let me check the, yeah. So we'll call this, I'm going to call this dictionary 1 because my dict is kind of hard to say repeatedly. So we're going to make our empty dictionary. So like tuples use parentheses, lists use hard brackets, dictionaries use curly brackets. In this case, dictionary 1 would be an empty dictionary. We don't want that necessarily, but we can make one. Just like you can start with empty lists, you can always add things to a dictionary. But we'll make one called grades, and we'll just walk through the example they've got here. So again, you set these up basically the same way you set up lists. The difference is that each spot in the dictionary will have two values separated by a colon. You're following along, we'll set this up together, and then we will print it out and see what it looks like. And then the window keeps getting in the way. And then if we print grades, you'll see that just like the lists and tuples before it, it just prints out the data. Sometimes you'll see dictionaries formatted in vertical structure. So you can separate your values out this way. Like grades 2. But you'll see it prints out the same way. It's just sometimes it's easier to visualize the information stacked vertically as opposed to in a line, because then you get that kind of key value structure. So you'll see them both ways depending on the length and purpose of the dictionary. But that's how to create dictionaries. So some basic operations with dictionaries. So instead of indexing into a dictionary, one of the benefits of these is that we can actually look up a value that we want according to a specific key. So in this case, if we wanted to look up, let's say Denise's grade, we would do print grades sorry, Denise. And then you'll see we get Denise's grade at the bottom here. And then like on the slide, if we print a name that isn't there, so we'll say Hayden, you get a key error. So it's saying we didn't find the key in the list. Yes. So Professor Glazier makes a good point. Dictionaries are super important to writing advanced models in CompuCell. The formatting of loops and conditionals is important to understand because that's kind of how any programming works. But a lot of interactions with CompuCell models is done with dictionaries. So if you are not very familiar with dictionaries, it might be a good idea to maybe spend a little bit of time in the evenings the next couple of days practicing with them. We'll do a little bit here in a minute to talk about kind of how some of the more abstract elements of dictionaries. But there will be some opportunity to practice with actual CompuCell once we get later in the week. So like with lists, we have a couple of dictionary operations. You can add an entry. So this doesn't work quite like the list in the sense that we actually just assign a new value. We don't append to the list with a function. You can say grades. Well, if we did want to add me, let's see, what grade would I get? Hopefully an A plus, right? Let's say we get a B plus. We don't have B plus in there. And then if we try to print grades, and oh, okay, we have to get rid of my first one, my key error first. We'll get B plus. So the reason that threw an error and stopped again is because even though we're working in a cell, it's still interpreting everything line by line. So if it gets to a point where something's not defined and you get a key error, it's going to stop and exit the code with that error. So since we've defined it here, we can print it out now. You can test if a key is in a dictionary. So let's say John in grades. And we didn't do a print here. I'm just going to use the interactive output. True, John is in grades. So now if we want to maintain that, I'm sorry. Let's see. Well, this won't be very universal because if it's false, then it's still going to say he's in grades, but you can also concatenate it like you would another string. So this value gets John in grades gets resolved as this boolean variable. And then again, if we were to do the same thing for, we'll just follow the example here, Daniel, since we know the output, we can say he's not in grades. Now, obviously, if you were really needing to check, you would want to have a function set up that would take the value of true or false and then give you a statement, either is or isn't, with an if-else statement. But in this case, since we can see the values, we'll just do kind of the hard coding this way. Jim says, note that for a dictionary, the keys are unique, but the values don't have to be. Yes, that's a good point. I think that might be on the next slide, actually. But each key in the dictionary is unique. You can't have duplicates. Well, you can have duplicates, but the duplicates overwrite the previous values. So whichever one comes later will overwrite whatever was in the original value. What was in the value that was in the original key will be overwritten by a new instance of the same key. The values can be the same though. So you can see here we have Katie, Sylvan, both have an A, that's perfectly fine. But you can't have two Katies with different grades. And then if we wanted to delete, we can use the delete function. grades, and then we'll do Anna. And then if we try to print grades, Anna. Sorry, dude. You'll get a key error. You'll notice even though we printed it successfully up here. So any questions on that before we move on? Does that kind of make sense? I think it's asking if that kind of makes sense is a good way to sabotage the "are there any questions" question. So maybe I'll just sit for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Okay. So again, if
So I have a
anything,
question.
yeah.
So in line 17, you wrote grades Hayden equals B plus. So does that mean you are adding that entry to the dictionary grades?
Yes. So now if we printed my key specifically, but if we just printed grades again, you would see that now I have an entry
Oh, and
in the grades dictionary.
I have a question. I
Mhm.
would like to know if we know the if we have any information about the keys, then how we will know the dictionary value. Is that possible or not? If you have the key value, and then I'm not sure.
If you have the key value,
Then you can call
yeah,
the dictionary.
right. So that's what we're doing here, right? So we're just
Okay.
printing. So if you know the key, you just access it with the key. And the key doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to be a string necessarily. It could be a number.
Okay.
Well, I guess a number.
Mhm.
It could be a variable. It doesn't have to be an explicit string. That's just the example we're using here.
Okay. It's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
More than one results for a key to dictionary lookup. Sanjay, was that a question or a comment? I'm not sure what you're saying there.
That's a comment for the question just asked, and I believe I'm just reiterating what Jim Sluka has just said.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So like we said, you can't have the same key twice, but you can have multiple values.
I did the same as you did, but I made a mistake. I did not print grades Anna, just I did print grades. And then also the keyword, the key error is in my case John, because I removed John.
Mhm.
What did I do wrong?
So you removed John,
Yeah,
and you
but
printed grades, but you got a key error?
yes, when you remove all this, and now you run it, and then in my case, still the key error is John, which should be in your case Anna. But it's
You want
not.
to paste your code into the chat real quick? There might be another problem.
Maybe. Who knows?
Hopefully one of us will. And then What did you have before that? You just want to paste your whole cell in.
Oh, I have many. Moment. This is the first cell. And then this is the last one.
So one thing I'm noticing here is it looks like you need a space after your Daniel and then the apostrophe. That might be causing your error because it's
The space after Daniel, but Daniel was
yeah,
fine. There was no error, and the in is green, so it recognized in as part of the code.
okay. Yeah, I guess you don't need that space. Let's see.
No brackets on John, okay? Syntax error after grades and when John starts, so before the John term starts, there we have a syntax error now. And when I put a space in, it's the same. So this is new and wasn't before. So I would prefer to keep the brackets, the square brackets. Naja, anyway, please move on. Maybe I did something else wrong.
Let's see. So I pasted in what you said. We'll take one more minute on this, and then we'll move on to the next thing. We can come back around later. Grades John, grades Maria. This might have copied that wrong. Yeah, I'm not getting a key error from the same code.
When you do it, it's working, and when I do it, it's not. Okay, that's
So
interesting.
you did have in the code that you pasted. Oh wait, I see. Okay, yeah, that commented out. I must have subconsciously uncommented it when I pasted it in. Oh no, sorry, that was a different person. Yeah, so you're printing grades for Maria before you've added Maria to the dictionary. So you
Really?
need to swap lines 3 and 4. Or sorry, 5 and 6.
Okay,
When you sent it, it looked like this.
indeed.
So if you add Maria first, then when you print, Maria will be in there.
Yeah, but still at the end, key error John. When I remove John.
Okay, well, let's maybe take a closer look, maybe during our break, or if there's a couple minutes at the end, because we do have a couple more things to talk about here.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep. Abhishek, you had a quick question?
Yeah, so I was wondering if we can assign more than one value to a particular key. For example, can we assign John with a plus as a total percentage?
So you, as far as I know, and maybe Jim or somebody can correct me on this if I'm wrong, you can use a list as your value, correct?
You can have anything inside of a dictionary. A key is unique. A key must be unique. But the key can point to anything. So you can have it as a dictionary entry. You could have another dictionary, and that dictionary could have dictionaries inside of it. But a key cannot point to two targets. The key points to a unique target. A
Yeah, so
target
you
can be a
can,
complex object, but it must point to a single target.
yeah, so you can point your key at like a tuple or a list if you wanted to have a couple of values in there.
Oh, okay, I see.
But you
As
can't,
an
like James
example,
was saying, you can't have the key point to two different values, but it can point to a list.
right. As an example, if you're keeping track of the position of a cell, you might have a list which consists of everywhere the cell has been. And at each time step, you might append to that list, even though that list is living inside of a dictionary.
Okay, so for example, a cell can move to an XY coordinate. So cell one like is a key that can point to a tuple like XY.
Yes, it could point to a tuple, or it could point to a list composed of tuples,
Oh,
or
okay.
it could point even to a list of all the cells which contain lists of all of their positions. So there's no restriction on the object that you put inside of a dictionary. That heterogeneity can be confusing because the first one element of the dictionary might be a number, the second element might be a list, the third element might be a string, but that's allowed in Python. It's weakly typed in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
One quick tip when you're working with comments is if you would like to leave a comment on a line that is commented out, you can just use your hash again. And then when you uncomment the line, it will still leave your comment at the end. Just something to think about. So some other features of dictionaries. So like we were talking about before, in order to access the dictionary, you do have to know something about the keys. So it's a little bit more complex than a list where everything is indexed numerically and sequentially. You can you may not know the length of the list off the bat, but you know that it starts at 0 and ends at some number. With a dictionary, though, in order to access it, you do need to know the key value. Luckily, dictionaries have iterables that will return the values for you. So if we do grades.keys, it will give you, hang on, sorry, this is running under, there we go, the old code. If you run grades.keys, it will return your list of keys. Let's put that in a print statement. Make it persistent. And then if you do grades.values, you'll get the list of values out. And so like it notes here, there's not necessarily a guaranteed order, but again, because things are being stored non-sequentially, that's not as important with dictionaries. You just need to know what the key is so you can reference the value at that key. So again, values can be anything, immutable and mutable objects. You can have duplicates of values. Like we were just saying, it can be lists or they can be other dictionaries. You can get into a dictionaries all the way down situation for sure here. But the keys must be unique. They're an immutable type. And they need to be hashable, but that's, it's a little bit technical. We don't necessarily need to talk about that today. I have seen this warning out there before that you should be careful with using float values as keys, but I couldn't find a good answer for why when I was researching this past week. If anybody knows off the top of their head, that might be good, but
Because you're
Um,
subject to rounding and truncation errors, so that means that you may not be able to find the thing.
yeah, that's true. So yeah, if you're using a dictionary just to index out things where you know exactly what the number is, that's fine. But if you're needing to access a dictionary through some kind of operation, and like Dr. Glazier said, if it's being rounded or truncated, it may never actually land on the correct key, especially if these things are being assigned automatically. So just in general, unless there's a very good and very careful reason for it, avoid using floats as key types. And again, there's no order. They just point to each other. Yeah, so I think we've said this to death. We'll walk through an example quickly of creating a dictionary. So you can build a dictionary by hand, but there are some ways to help us build dictionaries from existing information. So in this case, we want to make, as an example, we want to make a list of frequencies in a set of music lyrics. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to set up a function like we just talked about earlier to create this dictionary. We'll call our dictionary freaks for frequency. For word, and we'll go find some lyrics in a minute to work with this. If word and freaks. All right. So if we, let me go grab, well, okay. Just realized I deleted my example files that I was working with a couple days ago. That was not smart. But if we look up some lyrics, if somebody could, if you want to take a quick look over this, if somebody could walk us through what this is doing, or take a stab at walking us through what this is doing, while I go find some Daft Punk lyrics to test this with. Need a volunteer.
You may just have to call on someone.
Let's see. Where's my participants list? Let's see. Sorry, there's been a commotion at our front door. I think it's okay, but Sarabi, you want to take a quick stab at talking us through what this is doing?
Uh, yeah, sure. Give me a moment.
Mhm.
Actually, I was stuck in the previous example about, actually, I was wondering, is this possible to find the keys with the values with respect, if we know the knowledge of the values, we can find the key, because key is unique. That means the values means many values going to have, means if the values are same, the key is going to be different. So I was wondering how to print it.
Right.
Sorry.
So unfortunately, I don't think that there's a way. Yeah, so there are functions which look up keys from values, but you do have to keep in mind that because values can be duplicates, you
Uh-huh.
may get multiple keys from the same value.
Yes. So I
Um,
was wondering how to print it. Okay. Anyways, I will look into it. Thank you. Sure, I'm going to look.
yeah. James makes a good point. ChatGPT might be able to write that for you or tell you where it is at least. Uh, All right, I'm going to put our Daft Punk lyrics into a string. And then this code is just iterating over lyrics and counting the frequency of how many times each word occurs. Yes, it is. Yes, so what this is doing is it's basically looking through our lyrics list. If it doesn't exist, so it's checking for each word in lyrics list. If the word is already in the dictionary, it increments the value associated with that key by 1. If it's not, it adds the word to the dictionary and sets the value equal to 1. Let's see, what's the split syntax there? So now we can call lyrics to frequencies with split harder better. What that's going to do is take this string that I've made of words and just split it into a list and then feed that list into our oh, sorry. This goes after better better. It's a function on the string. There we go. So you'll see it took our lyrics list, turned it into our lyrics string, turned it into a list, and fed it into our dictionary, and it's counting the number of times that each word exists. So now we have a unique key for each word that's been incremented a certain number of times depending on how often it occurs in the dictionary. Yes, Kimberly does say we are due for a break, and Sanjay is asking what's up for discussion after dictionary today. So there's only a couple more slides here. We'll breeze through real quick, and then we'll take our break, and we can extend our break a little bit into module 4, because module 4 will also shouldn't take too long. A lot of good questions on this one, though, which is good, because like Dr. Glazer said, dictionaries are super important. Avishek, what's your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering if in order to form the dictionary, why do we need the split function? It cannot read a full string.
Well, let's give it a try. See what happens. So if we just feed it in a string, it's going to split
Oh, I see. I see.
everything by letter.
Oh.
So it will, like we've been talking about, it will convert the string into a list, but it'll do it by letter. So this way we can track words.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, can we, instead of reading a string, can we read a file, that we generate a file and we calculate the frequencies of each?
Yes, you can do that. We won't be talking about file input output today, but you can if you have, a string like this saved in a file somewhere, you can read that in and have the interpreter parse that string out and do the same thing we did here. So you don't have to manually paste it in. But yeah, that would be pretty useful to know. So we can include an example of that and send it out at some point this week.
Thank you.
So here we have another example of looking for the most used words. So again, these are returned in no particular order. And in this case, if we wanted to know which words were most common, we would want to use the dictionary to return the value or the key with the largest value. And we can, don't have to do that in person, but if you want to try it yourself afterwards, we can. We have a question here. How is lyrics defined? So here I just grabbed, again, some Daft Punk lyrics that are repetitive to help with our example. It's just defined as a string. We use the split function to break it into a list using the space as a delimiter. So break it into words.
Isn't lyrics actually called harder better?
Yes.
So how does Python know that lyrics equals harder better?
Because here we've defined our function. This is our formal variable, and when we call our function, it replaces the formal variable with our actual variable.
Got it. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So that's that kind of function piece, is it's taking what we give it and replacing lyrics. Everywhere you see lyrics, it's just replacing it with harder better.
Yeah, that's just like X. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so leveraging dictionary properties. So again, you can walk through a dictionary and make mutations in real time with it, like a list, but you're not limited to the sequential order of a list. So it introduces a little bit more freedom in how you move through the references in terms of not necessarily having to do an operation or not do an operation on every single thing, only if the key matches. All right, so I had an exercise here. Like Kimberly said, we are overdue for a break. So I think maybe we'll do what we did for module 1. If you would like to take a shot at the exercise, I'll leave this up while we're at break. And to answer Sanjay's question, our last module today, we'll be talking a little bit about object-oriented programming and how to create our own classes. And then that will be kind of the last big piece that you need to interface with CompuCell next week. So I'll leave this up on the screen in case anybody wants to take a shot. And we are 10 minutes into our break. So we'll take maybe 10 minutes, come back at 4:35. That's okay with people?